The last fleet hovered on the edge of human civilization, a small, battle-worn collection of ships that had managed to survive the decades of brutal war with the Orcs. Captain Ilara Hayes stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, gazing out at the swirling chaos in deep space. The fleet's shields flickered, barely holding as waves of Orcs ships pushed closer, their sleek, dark forms cutting through the void like predators circling their prey. "Captain," Commander Darius Cole's voice cut through her thoughts. He stood at the tactical console, his eyes fixed on the redouts that displayed their imminent doom. "They're pushing through our outer defenses. The Orcs will be here in less than 30 minutes. Ilara took a breath, her jaw tightening. "I know." Her fingers traced the surface of the cold command console. They had fought for so long, so hard, and yet here they were. She had watched the steady erosion of humanity's strength, the loss of allies, the fading of the fleet's resources, and the destruction of Earth itself. The final act of their fight for survival had become inevitable. And yet, the Orcs were still here. The Orcs, whose ships moved with relentless precision, whose weapons could obliterate entire cities in a matter of minutes. For years, humanity had thrown everything they had at this enemy, only to be met with defeat after defeat. But there was one last hope, one final piece of the puzzle hidden within the archives of the Vanguard. A whisper of a secret, an ancient relic buried deep within the ship's systems, something that could change the tide of battle. But it was a gamble that could either save them or doom them all. Ilara's eyes flicked to the holographic map of the fleet's defenses. The outer perimeter had been breached, and the Orcs' main force was closing in. There was no time left to waste. "Captain, permission to execute the emergency protocol," Cole said, his voice tight with urgency. He had always been the pragmatist, a man who believed in taking action without hesitation. "We need to abandon the Vanguard and escape to the last safe zone. There's no chance of surviving a full-on assault." Ilara's gaze never left the screen. She could feel the weight of every decision pressing on her chest. "Not yet," she said, her voice steady despite the anxiety gnawing at her. "There's another way. I found something." Cole's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "We don't have time for." "There's a protocol hidden in the Vanguard's core archives," Ilara interrupted, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. "Something from our ancestors. A pact. A bond made between humanity and another species, long forgotten." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm going to break it." Cole's expression shifted, disbelief and curiosity flickering across his face. "You're talking about invoking the Vra, aren't you?" Ilara didn't answer immediately. The name of the ancient race, the Vra, hung in the air like a weight, heavy with the knowledge of what such an action would mean. Humanity had forged an unspoken bond with the Vra centuries ago, a bond that had kept them hidden, a pact that had allowed humanity to survive in a universe filled with predators. But it was not a pact that came without its cost. The Vra were not allies. They were conquerors, bound by their own interests and laws. They demanded submission, not cooperation. But now, with the fleet on the verge of destruction, the last human survivors had no choice but to break the ancient pact. "The archives say it's possible," Ilara said, her voice low but resolute. "If I can activate the artifact, we might have a fighting chance. It's a risk, Darius, but it's the only one left." A heavy silence settled over the bridge. Cole seemed to weigh the decision, his fingers twitching as if he were about to reach for the comms panel, to call for an evacuation, to save as many as he could. But then his gaze hardened, and he gave a single nod. "Do it." Ilara moved swiftly, her fingers flying over the console, inputting commands that would unlock the hidden files. The ship's systems hummed in response, and a map of the Vanguard's interior flashed before her. She followed the coordinates to the hidden chamber deep within the ship, where the artifact was kept under heavy lockdown. As the door to the chamber slid open, a cold, ancient presence seemed to wash over her. The artifact lay before her, a crystal pulsating with dark energy, untouched for centuries. She reached out, her breath catching as her fingers brushed against the surface. The artifact flared to life. The Vanguard shuddered violently, and the entire fleet seemed to tremble as the stars outside flickered and warped. It had begun. The energy from the artifact surged through Ilara's fingertips, sending a jolt of raw power through her body. For a moment, the world around her felt distorted, as though she were no longer standing in the Vanguard's chamber, but suspended in the void of space itself. The artifact pulsed, and ancient symbols danced across her vision, alien glyphs, their meanings long lost to humanity. They twisted and flowed, like the language of gods, until they finally coalesced into a series of cryptic instructions. "Ilara, what have you done?" Darius Cole's voice crackled through the comms, filled with a mix of awe and concern. "The Vanguard is resonating. What is happening?" Ilara swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath as the artifact's energy coursed through her. She knew that breaking the ancient pact wasn't a simple task. The Vra's power was not something that could be wielded lightly, but desperation had driven her to this point. There was no turning back now. "I've activated the protocol," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "The Vra are coming." The ship groaned as the artifact's energy began to interact with the Vanguard's systems. Holographic displays across the room flared to life, each one showing fragmented data, the archives of an ancient race, their secrets long buried. The more Ilara deciphered, the more she realized the magnitude of what she was about to unleash. The Vra were not just a species. They were an empire, an ancient power that had manipulated the fates of countless civilizations. The Pact had been made during humanity's earliest days in space, when Earth had been but a fledgling world, struggling to survive in a dangerous and unforgiving galaxy. The Vra had offered their assistance, a shield against the predations of the cosmos, but with a heavy price. Humanity would remain in their debt, a servitude that would never be questioned. But there was more, so much more. The Pact wasn't just a promise of protection. It was a leash, one that bound humanity to the whims of the Vra for all eternity. And now the time had come for Ilara to break that leash, to unleash the power they had been granted and deal with the consequences. The hum of the Vanguard's engines grew louder as the ship began to warp, its systems sensing with the artifact's pulse. Ilara knew that the Vra would feel the disturbance, their ships, their empire, would sense the breach in their long-held control, and they would come. She raced through the darkened halls of the Vanguard, following the coordinates the artifact had unlocked. She arrived at the central command room, where the rest of the fleet's leadership had gathered. Commander Cole was there, waiting, his expression unreadable. "Captain, are we ready?" he asked, his voice tight with anticipation. Ilara didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced at the display in the center of the room, which now showed the incoming fleet of the Orcs. The enemy was moving fast, too fast. The Vanguard's shields were down to 20%, and the surrounding ships were beginning to crumble under the Orcs' relentless barrage. "We have minutes, maybe less," Ilara said, her mind racing. She turned to the crew gathered around the command table. "We've activated the artifact, but the Vra's forces are on the move. They'll arrive within hours, if not sooner. When they do, they will demand our compliance. They may even attempt to destroy us for breaking the pact." We don't know what they'll do." Cole stepped forward, his voice low but urgent. "And yet, we have no choice but to trust them. We don't have the resources to fend off the Orcs without their help. If we don't strike first, they will wipe us out. If the Vra are our only hope." "Then we must prepare for their arrival," Elara interrupted. "But understand this, Darius. We are not allies with the Vra. They are not here to save us. They're here to collect on a debt, and that debt comes with a price we might not be able to pay." Her words hung in the air like a warning, but there was no time to dwell on the consequences. The Orcs were getting closer, and the fleet had only one option: survive or be annihilated. As Elara gave the order to prepare for the Vra's arrival, the ship's lights flickered, and a deep, resonant hum filled the air. The artifact's power surged once more, and an eerie silence descended over the command room. Then a voice, ancient and cold, crackled through the ship's comms. It wasn't human, but the tone was unmistakable, a voice that carried the weight of millennia. "Humanity," the voice boomed, "you have broken the Pact. You will be judged. You will serve or you will fall. The Vra are here. And with their arrival, everything, humanity's fate, the survival of the fleet, and the balance of power in the galaxy, was about to change forever." The comms crackled again, a low, ominous hum that seemed to vibrate the very air of the vanguard. The voice from the Vra reverberated through every speaker, an unyielding reminder of their immense power. "Humanity," the voice repeated, its tone colder, more commanding. "Your time of ignorance is over. Prepare for judgment. You will kneel before us, or you will be obliterated." Elara's heart raced, but she stood resolute, her hands gripping the edge of the command table. The ancient pact had been broken, and the Vra had responded. The artifact had called them, and now the consequences were unfolding before her eyes. "Damn it," Cole muttered, his voice a mix of disbelief and fear. "We didn't expect them to arrive like this. We thought we had more time." "We still have time," Elara said, though her voice trembled slightly with uncertainty. "But not much. We need to prepare. The Vra won't wait. We have to figure out how to deal with them." A harsh silence followed as Elara's crew processed the weight of her words. The entire fleet had just been put on the brink of a precipice, one they had no idea how to navigate. No one had prepared for this. Humanity's desperate call for help had pulled the Vra into the fray, but it seemed they weren't here to save them. They were here to collect. "Captain, what if they don't give us a choice?" Commander Cole asked, his voice low, but filled with a tense edge. "What if they decide to enslave us, as they've done with others?" Elara looked at the map of the surrounding space, her mind racing through every possible scenario. The Orcs were still on their tail, their ships closing in, and now the Vra's arrival added a whole new layer of danger. Humanity was caught in a pincer, squeezed between two unstoppable forces. It was a nightmare, and Elara could feel the weight of it crashing down on her. "Then we'll have to fight them too," Elara said with a grim resolve. "We're not rolling over for anyone, not the Orcs, and certainly not the Vra. If we're going to survive this, we have to take control." As she spoke, the holographic projection of the Vra fleet appeared on the screen, their ships descending from the far reaches of space. The sheer scale of their armada was staggering. Hundreds of ships, each one a monolithic vessel of dark, angular design. They were unlike anything humanity had ever seen, silent, immovable, and vast. "Prepare the fleet for defensive maneuvers," Elara ordered, her voice steady as she leaned over the console. "We don't know what they're capable of, but we're not going to just let them walk in and dictate terms. Commander Cole, get me a direct line to the Vra. We need to know what they want, what they expect from us. Cole nodded, turning to the communications panel. He input a series of commands, and a few moments later, a new voice filled the bridge. It wasn't the same cold, booming one from before, but a different one. This one sharper, more focused. "Captain Elara Hayes," the voice said, its accent alien yet unmistakably articulate. "I am Haril, Supreme Warden of the Vra. Your defiance has been noted. You seek our aid, but you are mistaken if you believe we come to save you. We are here to assess your compliance. You'll offer us fealty, or you will cease to exist." The coldness in Haril's tone made Ilara's blood run cold, but she refused to back down. "We're not your slaves, Haril. Humanity doesn't bow to anyone." A long pause followed, and for a moment, Ilara wasn't sure if they had been cut off. But then, Haril spoke again, his voice now tinged with something akin to amusement. "So be it. You will learn the cost of such arrogance." The transmission cut abruptly, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. Ilara clenched her fists, frustration and fury rising within her. "They won't just let us go," Cole said quietly, his gaze hardening. "We have no choice but to fight." Ilara nodded, her eyes fixed on the Vra fleet. The Vanguard had long since given up any pretense of being a safe haven. It was now the last bastion of humanity, and if she was going to protect what was left, she would have to do it by any means necessary. "Prepare the fleet for all-out combat," Ilara said, her voice cold and decisive. "If we're going to face both the Orcs and the Vra, we'll need every advantage we can get." Her orders were met with swift efficiency, but Ilara couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into the jaws of something far worse than they could imagine. The Vra were ancient. They were ruthless. And now they were here to decide whether humanity would live to see another day. As the fleet prepared for battle, the screen flickered again, and this time a visual feed appeared. A massive Vra ship loomed in the distance, dark and imposing, like a giant shadow blocking out the stars. It was a harbinger of something far more terrifying than the Orcs had ever been. The true test was about to begin. Ilara stood tall, gripping the armrest of her chair. The last shred of humanity's hope was about to be put to the ultimate test. Would they bow to the Vra, or would they fight for their freedom, no matter the cost? She would make sure the answer wasn't decided for them. The Vanguard's hull trembled as the fleet prepared for the coming onslaught. Ilara could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders, but she refused to let it show. The Vra fleet hung in the distance, dark monoliths against the vastness of space, waiting like predators watching their prey. Meanwhile, the Orcs were closing in from the opposite side, their warships hammering at the remains of humanity's outer defenses. The time for strategizing was over. It was fight or die. "Captain," Cole's voice broke through her thoughts. "We've received multiple encrypted signals from the Orcs. They're demanding our surrender. The message is clear. They won't stop until we're wiped out." Ilara's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away from the display. "We won't surrender." "We can't afford to fight on two fronts," Cole replied, his tone strained. "If we don't do something soon, we'll be crushed between the Orcs and the Vra. We need to make a decision." Ilara thought for a long moment. The Vra had made their demands clear: submission or destruction. But their arrival wasn't just about subjugation. It was also about testing humanity's strength. She didn't believe for a second that the Vra would come to humanity's aid if they submitted. They would only enforce their dominance, bend the last remnants of humanity to their will. But the alternative was to defy them and face the unknown. The Vra had the power to wipe them out in seconds, and humanity had no real means to stand against them. "I've made my decision," Elara said firmly. "We fight. We hold the line, and we use everything we have to survive. The Vra want us to kneel, but we're going to make them regret ever thinking we would." Cole didn't respond immediately, but after a moment he nodded. Understood. The tactical display before them showed the Orcs ships on the verge of breaching the fleet's defenses, and the Vra fleet standing by in wait. The tension in the command room was palpable as the crew worked furiously to ready the fleet for battle. "Alert all ships in the fleet," Elara ordered. "We'll engage the Orcs first. We'll have to fight them off and hope we can delay the Vra's forces long enough to get reinforcements." Cole turned to his communications officer, who relayed the orders across the fleet. Elara knew this would be their most difficult fight yet. The Orcs had already proved to be a fierce adversary, but the Vra were a completely unknown threat. They were ancient, and their technology was incomprehensible to human minds. But if there was one thing humanity had learned in the past century of fighting for survival, it was how to adapt and fight with the ferocity of a cornered animal. "We've got a new problem," Cole said, his voice suddenly tense. "The Vra have deployed ships in formation around their flagship. They're preparing to launch some kind of energy wave. It's unlike anything we've ever seen before." Elara's mind raced. A concentrated energy wave could obliterate entire fleets, possibly even planets, depending on its magnitude. If the Vra unleashed it now, the entire fleet would be lost in moments. "We need to disrupt their firing sequence before they can unleash that energy," Elara said urgently. "Commander, get our best pilots into position. We'll make a run at that flagship. If we can disable their command ship, we might disrupt their coordinated strike." As her orders were relayed, Elara turned back to the tactical display. The Orcs were almost within range. If they didn't strike first, humanity's remaining defenses would be torn apart. The Vra, however, were a different kind of threat, one they didn't fully understand. A quiet hum filled the bridge, and Elara's breath caught as the comms crackled again. The voice of the Vra Supreme Warden, Hariel, filled the room. "You still resist, human. Your arrogance will be your undoing. But it is not too late. Submit to the Vra, and your people may yet live to see another dawn." Elara's grip tightened on the command console. "Tell your master, Hariel, that humanity will never bow. If you want us, you'll have to fight for it." The silence that followed felt like a weight, but then Hariel's voice came again, colder than ever. "Very well. Prepare to face the consequences of your defiance." The transmission ended with a finality that left Elara feeling like she was standing on the edge of an abyss. "All ships ready," Cole reported, his voice steady. "We're prepared to engage the Orcs and the Vra. Captain, the choice is yours. How do you want to lead this?" Elara stood tall, her mind clear. She had no illusions about the difficulty of the battle ahead. They were facing two enemies, both far more powerful than anything humanity had encountered before. But there was one thing she knew for certain: they couldn't afford to be cowed. The only way out of this fight was to give everything they had. "Engage the Orcs. We'll buy ourselves time, and then we'll make our move against the Vra." Her voice rang out with confidence, and for a moment she could feel the crew's collective resolve solidifying behind her. They were ready to face the impossible. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Elara felt a spark of hope ignite inside her. They would survive, or they would die trying. The bridge of the Vanguard was alive with frantic energy as the battle unfolded. Elara stood at the center, her eyes fixed on the swirling chaos displayed on the holographic tactical map. The Orcs ships were relentless, closing in fast, while the Vra fleet loomed like an unmovable shadow in the distance. The first volley from the Orcs tore through the defensive perimeter, their weapons hammering against the already weakened shields of the fleet. "Shields are holding at 15%, shouted Lieutenant Zara, the ship's shield officer. Her voice cracked with tension. "We're taking heavy hits." Ilara's mind raced. The Orcs were known for their brutal efficiency in combat, but the Vra had the potential to end this conflict in an instant if they chose to intervene. They had to buy time to strategize, to adapt, and to strike before they were overwhelmed. "Commander Cole," Ilara said sharply, not breaking her gaze from the tactical display, "deploy the fighter squadrons. I want them in a defensive formation around the vanguard. Keep the Orcs off our backs for as long as possible." Cole didn't hesitate. "Squadron leaders, take your positions. Protect the flagship," he barked into the comms. The fighter squadrons launched in a flurry of motion, their sleek ships darting out from the hangar base like hornets swarming a nest. Ilara watched as the fighters engaged the Orcs ships, dodging incoming fire and returning with deadly precision. Despite their best efforts, the enemy was too numerous, their tactics too calculated. The Orcs were relentless, advancing in waves that overwhelmed the vanguard's first line of defense. The fighter squadrons were doing their best to hold the line, but the vanguard's own weapons were struggling to keep pace with the incoming assault. "Incoming missile barrage," shouted the weapons officer, Lieutenant Avon. "We won't survive another hit like that." "We need to take out their launchers," Ilara said, the wheels turning in her mind. "Focus all fire on their missile ships. We can't afford another volley." The weapons officers responded quickly, rerouting power to the forward cannons. The vanguard's weapons opened fire, launching a barrage of energy blasts that slammed into the Orcs missile platforms. Several ships exploded in a flash of light, but the Orcs fleet wasn't deterred. They simply adapted, adjusting their formation to avoid further losses. But as the Orcs closed in for the kill, Ilara noticed something. The Vra fleet had shifted. The massive ships, which had initially remained stationary, now moved with purpose. Their dark shapes seemed to ripple with an energy Ilara couldn't quite comprehend, but the eerie silence surrounding their movements was broken only by the occasional hum of their hyperdrives. They were preparing something. Ilara could feel it, a sense of impending doom. "Commander, the Vra are initiating a charge," shouted Zara. "I'm detecting a massive energy build-up from their flagship. It's like nothing we've seen before." The hairs on the back of Ilara's neck stood on end. She didn't need to ask what that meant. The Vra were getting ready to unleash the energy wave they'd warned about. If that wave hit the fleet, it could turn the tide of the battle in seconds. "We can't let that happen," Ilara said, her voice hardening. "We need to strike now, while they're still preparing." The Vanguard's engines roared to life as the ship veered sharply, pushing itself toward the heart of the Vra fleet. Ilara's hands gripped the armrests of her command chair as the ship's systems adapted to the sudden change in trajectory. Behind them, the remaining human ships followed, their movements a synchronized dance of desperation. "All fighter squadrons, break formation and target the Vra flagship's weak points," Ilara ordered, her voice slicing through the chaos. "We need to distract them long enough to disrupt their energy wave." The fighters scattered, darting toward the massive Vra flagship, launching salvo after salvo of energy weapons. But the Vra ships moved with terrifying precision, their shields absorbing the hits effortlessly. The fighters were like gnats buzzing against a steel wall, valiant, but ultimately doomed. Meanwhile, the Vanguard fired all its remaining cannons, unleashing a torrent of plasma at the Vra flagship. The beams struck the flagship's shields, but they barely made a dent. Ilara gritted her teeth. This wasn't going to be enough. She needed to do something else. "Activate the artifact," she said abruptly, her voice filled with finality. Cole turned to her, shock on his face. "Captain, you can't be serious. If we use the artifact now..." "It's the only way," Ilara cut him off. "We have to stop them before they fire that weapon." Cole hesitated, his eyes scanning the battle unfolding around them, but then nodded grimly. "Understood. Initiating now." Ilara turned her attention back to the artifact's coordinates. The faint glow from the core chamber of the Vanguard flickered as the ship's systems sensed with the energy of the artifact. It was risky, and Ilara knew it. The artifact was powerful, but its effects were unpredictable. She had no idea what it might unleash, but it was humanity's only shot at surviving the Vra's overwhelming might. A pulse of energy erupted from the Vanguard, rippling through the fabric of space. The Vra flagship momentarily flickered, its shields pulsing under the strain. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, it seemed like the entire fleet had frozen in place. Then the Vra flagship's energy wave collapsed. The battle had just shifted in humanity's favor, but only for a moment. The Vra were not done. The pulse from the artifact reverberated through the Vanguard, its energy cascading through the battlefield like a shockwave. Ilara watched in awe as the Vra flagship flickered, its shields dimming and sputtering, a clear sign of vulnerability. For the first time since the battle began, the Vra seemed rattled. "Direct hit on their flagship's core," Lieutenant Evan reported, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Shields are weakening. We've opened a breach." Ilara didn't hesitate. "Target their main reactor. All weapons fire." The Vanguard's guns blazed to life, and energy bolts streaked across the black void of space, striking the now exposed core of the Vra flagship. The ship shuddered under the attack, massive explosions erupting from its hull, but the flagship didn't go down. It continued its eerie, deliberate approach, seemingly unfazed by the chaos around it. "Damn it!" Ilara cursed under her breath. The artifact's power had disrupted the Vra's energy wave for a moment, but it hadn't brought them to their knees. The flagship's regenerative technology was astonishing, repairing the damage faster than the Vanguard could inflict it. "We need something more," Cole said, his voice grim. "That energy pulse, it did something to the fleet. I can feel it in my head. What was that?" Ilara's eyes narrowed as she turned toward him. The artifact's effects were unpredictable, yes, but she hadn't anticipated this. Her mind raced, trying to process what had happened. The pulse hadn't just disrupted the Vra. It had sent ripples through the fabric of space itself. The artifact was amplifying energies beyond comprehension, tapping into forces that even humanity's most advanced minds could scarcely grasp. Cole's face was pale, his brow furrowed in pain. "It's like it's interfering with my thoughts, making everything feel distant, almost like we're detached." The realization hit Ilara like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just the Vra being affected by the artifact. Humanity had been touched by it as well. The pulse had disrupted more than just the enemy's systems. It was warping the minds of those on the Vanguard, distorting their perception of reality. "Captain," Zara said, her voice strained, "the fleet's energy levels are fluctuating. We're running out of time. We need to either stabilize or pull back." Ilara's gaze flickered over the tactical map again, but now it seemed distorted, like a reflection in shattered glass. The Orcs fleet was on the verge of breaking through, their ships closing in fast, while the Vra flagship had recovered and was preparing for its next strike. The pulse from the artifact had only delayed the inevitable. "Pull us back," Ilara ordered. "We can't sustain this any longer. The Orcs will destroy us if we don't regroup." "Pulling back now," Cole confirmed, his fingers flying over the console. The Vanguard lurched as the engines shifted, its massive form swinging away from the battle as its remaining fleet followed in tight formation. The Orcs pursued, but the Vra flagship remained eerily still, as though observing their retreat. Ilara's mind was clouded, disjointed, as though the pulse from the artifact was still thrumming in her head, pulling at her focus. She blinked, trying to clear the fog, but it was as if the very act of thinking was being twisted and pulled in multiple directions at once. It was a struggle just to stay present, just to remain in control. "This isn't right," Ilara murmured to herself. "The artifact, it's doing something to us. It's not just giving us power, it's changing us." Cole's voice broke through her thoughts, sharp and clear. "Captain, we can't afford to wait. The Vra will only get more aggressive, and the Orcs are closing in fast. What do we do?" Ilara's breath caught. The weight of command, of holding the fate of humanity in her hands, pressed down on her. But she couldn't afford to falter now. She had to push through whatever the artifact was doing to her, whatever strange force had been unleashed. The Vanguard, humanity's last hope, depended on it. "Prepare the next phase," Ilara said, her voice firm despite the uncertainty gnawing at her mind. "We're going to hit the Vra flagship again. This time, we take it down for good." Cole looked at her, his expression unreadable, but he gave a sharp nod. "Understood, Captain." The ship's systems hummed with anticipation as the fleet adjusted its position. Ilara could feel the artifact's influence growing stronger, tugging at her thoughts and blurring the lines between reality and illusion. It was as though the fabric of time and space was being stretched, and the Vanguard was caught in the middle. But she had no choice. She had to fight, to give everything she had. There was no turning back. "Commander, initiate the final strike sequence. This is it. We end this." The Vanguard surged forward, its engines roaring as it raced toward the Vra flagship, the artifact's power surging alongside them. Ilara steeled herself for the battle to come, knowing that whatever the outcome, humanity's future would be decided in this moment. But deep down, she couldn't shake the growing sense that the true price of the artifact, of their survival, was far higher than they could have ever imagined. The Vanguard tore through space, its engines screaming as it accelerated toward the Vra flagship. The artifact's energy coursed through the ship's systems, its influence spreading to every corner of the vessel, from the engines to the weapons systems, and even to the minds of the crew. Ilara could feel the pull, an unsettling presence, like a dark whisper just at the edge of her consciousness. It was as if the artifact had unlocked something within her, something primal. A sense of power, yes, but also a growing unease. "Captain, we're approaching the Vra flagship." Cole's voice cut through her disjointed thoughts. "I'm reading massive energy fluctuations from their ship. They're preparing to fire again." Ilara's eyes snapped to the tactical display, and her heart skipped a beat. The Vra flagship, despite its earlier damage, had fully recovered. Its shields were now glowing brighter than ever, and the ship's immense weapon systems hummed ominously as they powered up. The energy wave was coming, and this time it wasn't going to be interrupted. "Get us closer," Ilara ordered, her voice tight with determination. "Prepare all remaining weapons for a full barrage. We need to take that ship down now." The Vanguard's guns unleashed another barrage, but as the shots tore through space toward the Vra flagship, they were met with an impenetrable energy barrier. The Vra's technology was sophisticated, far beyond anything humanity had developed. It seemed to absorb and repel the attacks with ease, rendering their weapons useless. "Nothing's getting through," Lieutenant Evan reported, his voice laced with frustration. "We can't breach their shields." Elara gritted her teeth, her mind racing. They were so close. She had to find a way. The artifact had given them power, but it hadn't solved their greatest problem: how to defeat an enemy that was nearly invincible. "We'll have to get creative," Elara said, more to herself than to anyone else. She felt the artifact's influence grow stronger, its pulse sensing with her own heartbeat. A sudden idea flashed through her mind. Something risky, desperate. "Cole, we need to disable their shields manually. I'm going to give the order to deploy the boarding party." Cole turned to her, disbelief flashing in his eyes. "Boarding party? Captain, this is the Vra flagship. There's no way." "I don't care," Elara snapped, her eyes cold. "If we don't take action now, there won't be a fleet left to save. We're taking that ship down from the inside." Cole's expression tightened, but he didn't argue. He understood the stakes. Understood, already the teams. Elara turned back to the battle unfolding outside. The Orcs fleet was still closing in, their relentless pursuit threatening to overwhelm the human fleet's defenses. The Vra, however, had become their singular focus. If they didn't stop the flagship, everything else would be moot. "All hands, prepare for boarding operation," Elara called over the comms, her voice commanding. "We're taking the fight to them. This is our last chance. Don't let the Vra take our future." As the crew scrambled to execute the orders, Elara felt the unsettling presence of the artifact growing stronger, seeping into her thoughts. It was no longer just a tool. It was a force, and its power was overwhelming. The Vanguard's hangar doors opened, and dozens of sleek boarding pods shot toward the Vra flagship. Elara watched as the pods drifted out, guided by gravity and precision, the crew inside bracing for the harrowing assault to come. The sheer audacity of their plan weighed heavily on her mind. Boarding a vessel so technologically advanced, so powerful, was madness. Yet she had no choice. The human race was standing at the precipice, and only a desperate final act could save them. Cole's voice crackled over the comms again. "Boarding pods away. We've made contact with their hull. Teams are deploying. We're in." The Vra flagship shuddered as the boarding pods attached themselves to its surface. Elara could feel her pulse quicken as the first few explosions rang out from within the flagship. The human teams were fighting their way through, using explosives to breach the ship's outer defenses. "Captain, we've disabled the outer turrets." Moving toward the main reactor, one of the lead boarding team commanders reported. "We're almost there." Elara's hands clenched into fists. It was working. They were actually getting inside the Vra ship, a place no human had ever set foot in. And yet, even as she felt the surge of victory, a creeping doubt gnawed at her. The artifact's influence was too strong now, too invasive. It wasn't just making her stronger, it was changing her. "Captain, we're encountering heavy resistance," the commander's voice crackled through the comms. "The Vra aren't going down easy. We need backup." Elara's breath caught in her throat. She could hear the desperation in the commander's voice, and for a moment, the distance between the Vanguard and the boarding teams felt unbearable. But there was no time to dwell on that now. "Reinforce them," Elara barked. "Send all available troops to their location. We push through together." Her eyes flicked back to the tactical map. The Vra flagship was starting to shudder again, and Elara could sense that their system was destabilizing. The boarding teams had reached the heart of the ship, the main reactor. and it was only a matter of time before the entire flagship was disabled. But as the artifact's power surged, so did the disorienting sensation in her mind. The line between thought and action was blurring, and she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been awakened inside her was pushing her further from humanity. Whatever price they had paid to wield this power, it was far greater than she had ever imagined. But there was no going back. The battle was reaching its climax, and humanity's survival hung on the edge of a knife. The vanguard shuddered again as the boarding teams pressed forward, their explosive charges tearing through the heart of the Vra flagship. Ilara's mind was a whirl of conflicting emotions, determination, fear, and something deeper. The artifact's influence had become overwhelming, its power almost suffocating, and Ilara struggled to maintain control. She felt as though she was losing herself, as if the boundaries of her own mind were being stretched beyond recognition. Her thoughts flickered, and for a brief, disorienting moment, she was no longer on the vanguard. She was back on Earth, watching humanity's first steps into space. She saw the faces of her people, hopeful, determined, fearless. And then she saw something darker, something from the past, the forsaken Pact. The artifact was pulling at her in ways she couldn't fully understand. It wasn't just an ancient weapon. It was a relic of a time long forgotten, a link to something far older than the Vra, older than humanity itself. Its influence was both a gift and a curse. Captain. Cole's voice broke through her daze, his urgency snapping her back to the present. We're losing time. The Vra flagship is stabilizing, and the Orcs are closing in fast. We need to finish this now. Ilara blinked, fighting to clear her thoughts. The Vra flagship was almost within reach of being neutralized, but the Orcs were another threat altogether. If they didn't act quickly, the situation would spiral out of control. Humanity had already given everything. This was the final push, the last stand. All remaining forces, focus everything on the Vra reactor, Ilara ordered, her voice hardening with resolve. We don't stop until that ship is gone. This ends today. The vanguard rumbled beneath her as its remaining firepower concentrated on the Vra flagship. The energy pulses that streaked through space were filled with raw fury, humanity's fury. The shields on the Vra ship flickered as it absorbed wave after wave of fire, but the cracks were beginning to show. The artifact had done its job. Now it was up to humanity to finish what they had started. Inside the flagship, the boarding teams had breached the reactor core. The commander's voice crackled through the comms again, breathless and strained. We've made it, Captain. The reactor's exposed. We've planted the charges. We're pulling back to the pods. Ilara's pulse quickened. This was it. The final blow. Get them out of there, she ordered. We don't have much time. We're setting off the detonations in 10 seconds. The tactical map showed the last remaining enemy ships trying to regroup. The Orcs were dangerously close. The Vra flagship was the greater threat, but if they couldn't destroy it, humanity's victory would be short-lived. As Ilara counted down in her head, the boarding team's escape pods ejected, propelled by the sheer force of their own desperation. The charges planted within the reactor core would trigger a chain reaction that would obliterate the Vra flagship and take its entire fleet down with it. 5, 4, 3. Ilara's voice was steady, but inside, the storm raged. She felt as if she were walking the line between victory and annihilation. 2, 1. The Vanguard's main cannons fired one final time. The blast collided with the Vra flagship at the exact moment the boarding team's charges detonated. Space seemed to ripple as the flagship's core ruptured, sending a shockwave through the entire fleet. Explosions erupted in every direction, and for a brief, breathtaking instant, the universe itself seemed to hold its breath. And then everything changed. The Vra flagship disintegrated in a blinding flash, its immense mass collapsing in on itself as the blast wave tore through the remaining enemy ships. The Orcs, caught in the aftermath of the destruction, were sent spiraling into chaos. Their fleets, now thrown into disarray, scattered like leaves in a storm. But the price had been steep. The Vanguard groaned under the strain of the energy unleashed, its systems flickering as it struggled to maintain its integrity. The artifact's influence was waning, but so was the strength of Ilara's mind. She could feel herself slipping, the artifact's power draining her, leaving her feeling hollow, as if she had given too much. "Captain, we've won." Cole's voice was full of disbelief and triumph. "The Vra are gone. The Orcs are retreating." But Ilara only half heard him. The victory was theirs, but it came at a cost she couldn't yet comprehend. As the Vanguard limped away from the wreckage of the battle, she realized something deep and troubling. The artifact's power wasn't just a tool to save humanity, it had transformed them, just as it had transformed her. She had wielded its power, but now it was unclear whether she would ever be the same again. The crew celebrated, their voices filled with the joy of victory, but Ilara could only stare into the depths of space, where the shattered remnants of the Vra fleet floated. The battle had been won, but the true consequences of their survival were still to come. The artifact had changed everything, and as Ilara gazed into the endless black void, she realized that the Forsaken Pact had not been just a history of broken promises. It was a warning, one that humanity had now inherited. The war was over, but a new chapter had begun, one in which humanity would have to confront not only its past, but the power that now coursed through its veins. The true cost of survival had only just begun to unfold.